Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey there, what's up, audience? It's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. Full transparency, just met Adam Jason for the first time about 92 seconds ago, but we kind of run in the same circles. We have a lot of the same mentors. We belong to one of the same men's group, so I know the conversation is going to be awesome because Adam decided to cash out of maybe the American dream and go live down in Colombia a couple years ago to, I don't know exactly what you're doing, start a coffee company and do private equity in Colombia, which for anybody that watches Narcos just sounds super dangerous, and people in America are scared about living south of the border. So I want to dig into that. Just recently got married, used to be, do the big law, big business thing here in America, and decided that living outside of the country was the better fit. So Adam, I'm looking forward to jumping in. And where do you want to start? Give us the 60-second Reader's Digest on where you're from, where you came from, and how the heck you ended up doing business in Colombia.
I certainly appreciate the opportunity. Hope the conversation is as interesting for your listeners and for you as it has been for my life, I would say. It's been quite the journey up to now. 36 years old, just got married. Obviously, a lot led up to that. Originally from Buffalo, New York. Professionally, my background is as call it big law attorney, practiced SEC capital markets in the US for really a client base of Fortune 500s, large Wall Street banks. Raised a ton of money, took a bunch of companies public, was at a point in my career where I decided between, do I do the partnership route at the law firm? Do I go in-house and work for a client? Or do I do something a little bit different? I got recruited to go to a firm down in Houston from the firm that I was at in Dallas and had a month in between. Decided to do some traveling, which I'd really never done at any point in my life. My background is very much go to high school, go to college, do whatever, go to work. But the idea of getting out, exploring the world, living in different countries, for most people I know, probably having a passport is probably a little bit of a strange dynamic. So found Colombia back in 2017, came down here as part of that vacation, and also I would say an investment tour and looking for some interesting opportunities. Fell in love with the country, fell in love with the opportunities that I saw down here, went back to the US, practiced law at the new law firm for 10 months, and then gave myself, I think, the kick I needed to say, I want to try something entrepreneurial. This world of working in kind of corporate America will always be here for me if I want to go back to it, and I never have. So now I live down here in Colombia. I've been down here since January 2018, started a private equity fund down here that's with a client base really focused on bringing US-based capital, US-based investors into projects in LATAM. Since 2017, we've grown the Green Coffee Company, which is now one of the top 3 producers of coffee in all of Colombia. We're looking at a transaction just today, actually, that would get us to number 2. So really accelerated that business tremendously. We're also invested heavily in I would say, leader in the technology space down here in Colombia in digital learning, video game creation, all the metaverse conversation that you're hearing going on right now. We really try to be on the forefront of emerging markets, particularly in LATAM, and open those businesses up to people who are looking for a little bit of diversity in their investing life, whether it be because of obviously the higher potential for returns, but what they're seeing in the US, whether it's with respect to inflation, administration, or whatever their motives might be. And we try to be kind of the US trained foreign partners that people can get comfortable investing in and who we can deliver returns for.
So there's a bunch of terms in there that I think the average person like myself might shake my head and be like, yeah, sure, yeah, private equity, yeah. But nobody nobody that's not in the inside of that or worked on the law side of that knows what the hell this is. So just defining some terms that get thrown a lot, venture capital, private equity, US based, LATAM. Can you explain? Maybe we just start with private equity. What does that even mean, and why is that beneficial for people in Colombia to have somebody like you to find US dollars, and and how would it be beneficial for somebody like me in the U.S. to invest in a country I'm probably not going to go to, and sure as hell not going to get out there to inspect the coffee fields, right? Like, what does private equity mean? What's venture capital, and like, how does all that stuff play together? Like, what is it, and what's the why?
Our model is basically build businesses from scratch or find interesting opportunities and invest our own money into those businesses. So coffee, we basically started back in 2017 with nothing but an idea of creating a cash flowing alternative real estate project for traditionally commercial real estate investors. Since that point, we've seen basically that there is no ceiling to growth and how public markets might respond to the business if we get to a public exit someday. But our model has always been based around bring capital from the US markets outside of Colombia and disrupt industries here in Colombia that are ripe for disruption. And everybody thinks Colombian coffee, it's kind of known globally, I would say. But what they don't realize is basically the nascency from a sophistication perspective of the market, the capital that's coming in. We've brought in about 180 investors for a total of just over $20 million to date, and we've grown to be one of the top 3 producers in the country. So the thesis and the theme behind what we're doing has always been, for a relatively modest sum of capital, you can be a major player in a major industry in a country that values kind of the spaces that we're in, without having any limitations in terms of exits, getting to an IPO in the US. Everything we do is US structured. So you'd have the same basically upside and potential as you would if you were investing in a US domestic. So our thought is open new opportunities.
I'm trying to think through this because Colombia, I'm imagining coffee production is one of their biggest businesses, right?
Yeah, it's the declared national product of the country.
Okay, so I'm thinking of any big business, if you wanted to come to America and start something to rival a Walmart or an Apple or a Nike or something like that. The idea that you could be the number 3 player in a big boy business in America for 20 million, you might not be able to do it for 20 billion. Like, right. So is that the trade-off where investors, hey, there might be more risk investing overseas, more boom and bust, more government involvement. Like I said, I can't come down there and exactly inspect the coffee plants. But for the amount of capital that I'm guessing the 180 people have been able to invest, there's got to be a bigger, I don't want to use the term lotto ticket thesis, but there's got to be a bigger exit strategy thesis than, I can invest here in Nike in the United States and maybe make a 3% dividend and a couple percent growth over a decade. So is that the good news for U.S. investors, that there's just a better return multiple if you do your job right?
Yep. I would call them levers, are basically higher returns and also access. To your initial point, if you want to participate in any kind of substantial agriculture investment in the US, you're either competing directly against Bill Gates, who's buying most of the farmland in the US. You need capital that is going to be interesting to Wall Street banks who are looking for a placement the size you might be making. Huge valuations going on in agriculture in the US right now. By comparison, our average investor places 150,000 to 250,000 with us, access that they might not be able to buy at that dollar level in the US. And we compensate for that by also having a higher return profile. For example, we just completed our Series B funding round of $10 million here in Colombia. All of the investors in that round are expecting 7x on their money into 2025 as we get to a sale of the business or an IPO. That's obviously going to beat substantially any kind of return you're going to get on an agricultural REIT in the US or anything that's a kind of cap rate based asset.
Yeah. And what's the, because investors have to be thinking about this, what's the risk of ruin? Like, what's the thing that happens where instead of 7x, in 2024 there's a regulatory change or there's a this change or, you know, Adam Jason missed the mark and it's like, well, now my 150 is worth zero. Because I'm imagining if the upside potential is 7x, there has to be some greater than zero chance that the downside is zero. So what could go wrong?
I think we sell ourselves short intentionally so that people are always comfortable around the valuation. For example, this last funding round we did, we will have a book value after this raise, which is, you know, assets minus liabilities on your balance sheet of about $20 million and $2 million of debt. So as of today, we're looking at bringing in a little bit of additional capital to fund another round of acquisitions because the balance sheet is so strong and it's been so appealing to investors. I think when you have a strong balance sheet like that, you have an asset and a business that's cash flowing, the risk of going to zero is quite low. I mean, it would basically require somebody to take all the land. We're not in a position of default, anything along those lines. Agriculture, the biggest risk is always going to be weather, meeting production targets. Climate change and what we see there will be kind of the focus of building a sustainable business over the long term, but we're positioning ourselves well for that, whether it be improvements that we're making on our farms, the team that we're hiring. We just hired a agronomy director from Starbucks to come work with us to really hammer down on the operational side of the business. So many, you know, fertilizer practices, all these kind of things that are, I guess, controllable that you can use to manage the operation. But our idea is not this is crypto or whatever, where there's a potential to go to zero, or I'm investing in a tech company and it's a computer and an idea. I mean, we're talking about $20 million in assets that would be tough to to vanish without putting ourselves in a compromising debt position, which we're not even going close to doing.
Right. Right. And, you know, I don't know how political you want to get, but I'm a pretty crazy libertarian. I think most regulation is worthless, but we have been preconditioned. I won't use the word tricked. I won't be that aggressive. We have been preconditioned in America that for the safety of the investors and so that you don't get scammed, we need more and more regulation and more barrier to entry and more disclosure. And then, not surprisingly, every couple years, there's some big front page story of the Wall Street Journal, how a bunch of people still got scammed out of all their money by somebody like Bernie Madoff. So comparatively speaking, since you did private equity and taking companies public in America versus your experience thus far in the last, 3, 4, 5 years in Colombia, what's the business environment like in, Central South America? Like, is it easier for, no offense, you don't exactly look Hispanic. Is it easier for a white guy to go into the market there and start a business and be, moving millions of dollars around and having land contracts and knowing that you're not going to get screwed out of things? Like, what is the business environment like there versus America? I'm guessing it's a little bit more hands-off, a little bit more libertarian, but I could be totally wrong.
It's easier in the sense that capital goes a lot farther. It's more challenging in the sense that it's still very much on the ground, you have to be here and understand the local customs, laws, regulations, everything to really figure it out and to deliver on your promises to investors. To your point, people see my face and you enter the conversations from a different dynamic. People think that because I'm white, we have tons of or unlimited amounts of money, and you might be in a position of getting screwed in the sense that people are trying to overcharge you for things or these kind of things. So it requires time spent, work put in, and understanding prices, markets, how things work a little bit before I think it's wise to bring in outside capital or really try and scale things up. That said, tons of opportunity in the market where I am in Colombia, but also throughout LATAM. I was just in Mexico City a few weeks ago. Lots of opportunities for new businesses, but also call them copycat businesses. Some of the largest valuations, the unicorn companies that we're seeing are essentially replicas of what has worked in developed markets, whether it be the Colombian equivalent of Amazon, the Colombian equivalent of DoorDash. These companies are all receiving mega valuations and mega investments from some of the most reputable investment firms around the world. We just saw SoftBank, which, if your audience knows, really one of the largest kind of investment firms out of Japan. They're putting billions of dollars into the country. People are, I think, continuing to be more and more optimistic about the emerging world. And the emerging world is, in a sense, catching up to the standards people expect, call it domestically, if we're talking to mostly US folks. Since I've been here, the stat I saw a couple of days ago, $32 billion of foreign investment coming into Colombia in the last 20 years. 47% of that has come in the last 3. So people are continuing to see more and more opportunity. They're, I think, a little bit starved for opportunities in traditional markets,
right,
where if you can meet those return profiles like we talked about, there's capital available.
Yeah. And it's got to feel for most US-based investors that things are feeling pretty frothy, right? Like stock market at an all-time high, real estate prices at an all-time high, gold at an all-time high. I've got to imagine savvy investors are looking south of the border or to other continents to be like, hey, where could I deploy some money and get in at the ground floor or the third story, instead of right now it feels like we're at the 60 or 70 story and hoping that there's something else above us. So are you hearing from those type of investors that are like, man, I want to lock in some of my US gains and get in on the ground floor in some emerging market? Is that kind of your investor profile?
100%. I can't predict where markets are going to go. Every time I think that public equities are at an all-time high, they go a little bit higher. Same with crypto and those things. But there's a couple of asset classes that we basically know have topped out, and there's some macroeconomic events going on that are driving investment decisions.
Right.
For example, all junk public debt right now, I think it's 85% of it is completely underwater. So companies that are issuing debt, investment into their companies that are non-investment grade securities, 85% of those are not even keeping up with the inflation rate. So you're seeing basically an entire asset class potential opportunity for investment being essentially eliminated if you're trying to do anything other than, if you're trying to make any kind of return whatsoever. If you're investing in public equities, I think in many ways it's riding momentum and hoping to scrape off a last little piece. I could be entirely wrong. I think there's some of that in the crypto space, although I'm not an expert there at all and don't study enough or claim to be, but it seems to be kind of, when you get this large of a groundswell around something, it's tough to find price discounts.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of capital moving into alternative investments, private investments, both domestically, but especially globally as well. People are looking for returns that beat that really crazy inflation rate and where they can't find them elsewhere.
Yeah, I remember, I've said this on the podcast before, in my 20s when I didn't have enough gray hair to be taken seriously by these elderly clients at Washington Mutual where I worked, I had did mortgages, but also had my Series 7, and I would just try to talk to people that were renewing their CDs and be like, hey, I know it's crazy. I know you've never done anything but a CD, but we can get you this AIG fixed rate annuity. I can't call it FDIC insured, but fixed rate annuities are basically insured similar to how banking relationships are. And, it's got a floor of 4.5%. Your CD is about to roll over at 3.5%. They're like, no, CDs are coming back. I was taught to ladder CDs, and that's how I'm going to retire. And Chris and I looked it up the other day. Your average 5-year CD right now is paying like 0.05%, while inflation is at 5%. So if you're one of these elderly people who worked your whole life to do everything right, and you didn't get out ahead of inflation a couple of years ago, you're fucked. Like, if you have fixed income, Social Security, fixed income pension, and some CDs, you're in real bad shape. And it would be terrifying to go into the stock market right now if you're 70 or 80 and don't have the time to weather the storm of a downturn.
I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about wealth creation, diversification, wealth protection, what the impact of inflation might be on an investment account or a savings account. I think a lot of people who are looking to grow wealth are in wealth protection mode, and people who want to grow wealth are not thinking about things correctly. I can have these conversations literally with my friends, family, whoever. To them, having money in a savings account that's losing 4% is better than putting money to work and trying to make a little bit on that. I have a tough time wrapping my head around it, but you see it everywhere. And
Right.
you're seeing a transition now, which I think is interesting, of asset managers in the sense of pension funds, large insurance companies, lots of these groups who are really in asset protection mode, delivering a consistent return, having to branch out into alternative investments, things that are offshore, and even leveraging to be able to make those placements, because it's so hard just for them to keep up with the market dynamics that are going on, whether it's the money printing, the effects that result from inflation around that. Everybody's searching for something new. And if you're not, you're kind of getting left behind. We try to fill that role for the high net worth individual guy who's ignored by these large institutions, but is oftentimes just as sophisticated in terms of being able to analyze a business, or they're entrepreneurial themselves, so they know much better how to ask the right questions. Interesting dynamic, and a lot of people are prepared to do something a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And since you are taking US dollars, and I'm guessing you have some, legal affiliation maybe still to America, do your investors, do they have to be accredited investors? Does the information clear through America so there's some type of perception or protection, whether that's perceived or real? Or is it all kind of like I would just wire $100,000 to Colombia and hope hope Mr. Jason is an honest guy?
Not the latter. So we structure, not that you shouldn't, but we structure everything out of the U.S. For the coffee project, for example, for the green coffee company. Our headquarters is in Delaware, which really is the top corporate law jurisdiction in the U.S. Then it has below it subsidiaries in Colombia that own the assets and the farms and everything. But investing with us, you invest into a U.S. entity, and it's the same treatment as if you were to invest in Apple with respect to taxes, dividend payouts, all that kind of thing. We do all our banking through JP Morgan in the US. We run all the same verifications in terms of accreditation, anti-money laundering, all the same tests and standards that you'd have if it was a US based product.
Awesome. And you mentioned dividend. I didn't even think about that. When you mentioned things like, hey, we've got a 4-year target, 3-year target of 7x on returns. Along the way, are you guys paying a dividend of like a preferred dividend, or only if it's profitable that crop season, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a projected average 8% dividend throughout the holding period through 2025 is our target exit year. This year, we're looking at about 5.7 million of revenue, and that should result in about 750 to 800K of profit. We'll pay a dividend out to the investors in 2022 and each year that they're involved in the investment. And I think combine that with some ability to roll over the dividends at a discount and take a bigger piece of the company.
Interesting. And is that an open fund? Like I could wire the money today and get started, or is that closed based on the initial offering?
We just closed on 10 million in our Series B. That said, we have at least 2 to 3 acquisitions we're looking at right now. I think, and I know we're extending the offering and over raise a little bit so that we can get more capital from our existing guys, but also more capital from people who would like to participate. We're looking at an acquisition right now that would put us at number 2 in the country. Payback period on the investment would be, I think, less than 3 years based on everything we're seeing. And the property is immediately adjacent to our existing farms. So we get to use all of our own infrastructure. It's a super easy tack on that makes sense to extend the raise a little bit, bring in a little more capital and grow the business.
Nice.
So if people are interested or you're interested, we're still, I think at the time this comes out in mid-January, still having those conversations, I expect, unless, huge checks are coming, which is possible.
Speaking of huge checks, have you met, kind of all run in the same circles, have you met Justin Donald out of Austin? Are you guys familiar with each other?
I have, and I presented to his lifestyle investor group, and he's actually an investor himself in the business.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was gonna say if you guys haven't made a connection, that was gonna be an absolute introduction from me that we have to make right away. But yeah, you guys are super well aligned. So when you mentioned like, hey, we're buying these farms or we're buying this infrastructure, and obviously we have to staff them. What does that look like to you? I mean, are you going and finding, Miguel, who's owned the family farm next door for 50 years, and you're just sitting down and breaking bread and trying to buy the family farm? Or is this more like B2B where, Folgers owns this farm that's underproducing and you think you can do a better job? What do the boots on the ground business activities look? Because, like, I got to be honest, I might give you money just because I want to invest in the company, but I want to fly down there and see how it all works. Like, because my wife's
you have to.
Yeah, exactly, have to. My wife's family is originally from Mexico, and I always say, like, if I could find a way to do business in Mexico, I might be gone tomorrow. Because there's better surfing, better ceviche, and not as much stigma around drinking a beer over lunch. So,
right.
What does it
none
look
actually
like?
None
Whatsoever. Right. Chris here, we were just talking the other night. Like, how does he get his finances in a place where he can get an apartment in Guadalajara because he loves it down there? His boyfriend's down there. It just makes sense. But it's like, what does it look like, boots on the ground, for Adam working in Colombia?
Yeah. Many of our investors, I think, invest partially for the lifestyle aspect of it. They come down here, it becomes tax deductible for them. We take them out on the helicopters, we take them down to the farms. It's a fun time. And also, if you love coffee, it's an industry that would be very hard to touch otherwise. Brazil, Vietnam are the only two global producers of coffee greater than Colombia, and there's zero opportunities to invest there, and even less than zero for U.S. investors who want to invest through a U.S. structure. So we've got a nice position in the market. In terms of the acquisition strategy and how we do that, it's very much in-person conversations with large landholding families that are generational wealth. The opportunities we see are great-grandfather started a coffee farm, grew it, passed it down a couple of generations. Most of the family's wealth is locked up in the land that they have. And now great-great-grandson wants to go live in Miami or wherever, and all the money that they have is in the coffee land here. So at that point, we're able to come in and buy those land holdings really at great discounts. Cash is still king here. When you're talking in millions of dollars for in a country where the minimum wage right now is about $250 a month, paying in cash and having that kind of access to capital goes an extremely long way. When we first started, it was very much look everywhere and narrow down the funnel.
Right.
Now in the area we are, which is about an hour and a half south of Medellin, Colombia, where I am currently, we've become the largest employer in the town, the largest landholder in the town. So opportunities are more coming to us because people know we're able to buy. We've built the most, without a doubt, technologically advanced coffee processing facility here in Colombia. And I think globally, our team has brought technology from the flower industry, the olive industry, kind of all of the more sophisticated agriculture industries that we see down here over to coffee, so we could apply that technology and really be a leader so that we can process more coffee at a higher quality, greater consistency, sell to a greater number of clients. But the market here is very decentralized. I think 95% of all coffee farmers own under 3 acres. So it's really identifying the acquisition targets that make sense. There's not a ton of them, but the ones that are available, we now know those guys.
Yeah, and this might be proprietary secrets that we can't talk about on the show, but is it public knowledge what a acre of decent coffee producing land is worth in Colombia? I mean, obviously you're trying to get it as inexpensively as possible, but is there a baseline that you can say publicly to like open the conversation? And if not, you can tell me to piss off. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we try to buy everything is in hectares or quadras here. So I'm doing the conversion, but we've to date bought about 2,400 acres, and we were paying on average for those. This was a few years ago when the exchange rate was a little different, about 18 million pesos, which in today's dollars would be about 4,300 US dollars per. I would call it 3 grand an acre if I
Okay.
did the conversion correctly. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. And then institutional risks. Yeah, I don't even know what the structure of the government is in Colombia. I mean, all my Central American knowledge comes from watching old National Geographic specials on like the Reagan years when we were, fighting the Contras and taking Noriega out, and Panama, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all the problems that we had there. What does the country look like now? What is the social structure? What is the government structure like? What can you tell us about being in Colombia for those that want to learn more about the country?
I hope your audience likes Colombia and coffee, or this is just an investment conversation with you. But I hope it's interesting to people. Yeah, I mean, macroeconomically, Colombia is significant in the region. It's the number one ally of the U.S. in South America. Democratically elected government that currently is right of center with respect to business and what have you. Fairly stable. I think you're seeing that when it comes to the big players that are moving a lot of money here. About 20 minutes from me, Pepsi is opening their biggest headquarters down here in LATAM. I mentioned the 32 billion in forward investment that's come in here just in the last few years. I think a lot of people are bullish on it as a market. I expect that Colombia will be significant in the, call it, handover of some of the business and manufacturing, textile production that you're seeing in China and Southeast Asia, as potentially tensions there continue to rise. You have more of these supply chain bottlenecks and things that are slowing down the movement of goods. Colombia, with its proximity to the US, its alliance with the US, kind of a friendly dynamic globally, I think is ripe for opportunity and continuing to expand. I think right now we're doing about 8% annually in terms of GDP, a lot of growth domestically and then through foreign investment.
Yeah. So how much easier? Because I agree with you. When I started this podcast, I actually hired a tutor who is particularly asked to remain nameless. He won't even allow me to say what college he's a professor at. But when we talk about kind of global economic and global political and global turmoil issues, he's like, I kind of think a lot of Americans are getting the 3-card Monty, where they're looking at Russia, they're looking at China, and really the greatest opportunity and or the greatest market threat for business is Latin America. He's like, there's just so much pent up demand there. There's so much pent up horsepower of employment opportunity and he goes, it's easier to get goods from Central America to Long Beach or Florida than it is to get it there from China. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting take. And we've actually gone over some of the geopolitical issues south of the border, just for context. But is that what you're seeing? That just like, man, there's a huge labor force down there. It'd be easier to get goods to California specifically. What do you think is next? Like you mentioned Pepsi and whatnot. What are some other industries that you think are ripe for relocation to Latin America?
There's a strong human capital pool down here in Colombia. If we step outside of coffee and talk kind of technology and the business that we have there, that company went from 3 guys making 7K in revenues in 2019 to 96 employees and 2.7 million of revenue last year, due in large part to tapping into the local market and the talent pool here that in the video game space, in movies, serve as quite literally a direct competitor to what you're seeing come out of Hollywood. Atlanta's making a lot of movies right now, but for a small fraction of what it might take to get, that kind of call it high level production done in the US or in a domestic market, you're seeing a lot of opportunities here. We're seeing studio, like the crunch now in the streaming space and kind of the race between Netflix and Amazon and all these things. People don't have places to even film enough content. So
Right.
we're seeing offers and solicitations for building studios down here, 20 million bucks, literally without many terms, and just build this so we can film there because we need land, we need cheap labor, we need beautiful countrysides, we need talent that can do these kind of things. So I think you're also seeing government support in the sense of kind of call it the orange economy of tax rebates and these kind of things to have more of that industry relocated here. The country is Colombia specifically, but LATAM in general, I think is opening up to seeing its own potential and understanding that there's the possibility to compete on a global front in a lot of these industries. You have a very interesting cultural shift, I would say, where most people come from labor markets and being employees to now a substantial portion of the population being quite young in nature. I think the average person here is 25 years old. They see more than ever the potential to work in technology, work from home, become an entrepreneur at a meaningful level, not just, oh, I'm going to open, a small store on the corner in the neighborhood that I've never left. The globalization of the world is picking up, I think, a lot of LATAM and creating more and more opportunities. So obviously from the conversation we're having, the money I've brought here, the time I've spent here, I'm quite bullish on where things could go.
Yeah. And how much did I hate to even say the word, but how much did the pandemic accelerate that where now, the new normal is this? I mean, we're having a Zoom meeting from Colombia to, my second house in Vegas. We're on a platform that didn't exist 10 years ago, on an internet speed connection that didn't probably exist in Colombia 10 years ago. It's like we live in Star Trek and nobody is appreciative of it. So how much do you think the pandemic and like everybody realizing this is our new reality and you can work from anywhere, how much of this has either accelerated it or made your job easier? Like what's the silver lining of the pain in the ass of the last 2 years?
I guess people have become accustomed to it where we can have this conversation and we can jump on a call a minute before the podcast starts and do this instead of, okay, we have to travel and meet in person and all that kind of stuff. I think it's good and bad. I would debate kind of the value of in-person relationships versus doing everything virtually. I don't actually love it. I think that in terms of doing business here, as I mentioned, it's still very much you have to see people in person. I would say of all of my Zoom calls, 99% of them are with non-Colombians. Most people want to still meet here. But I do think that with the setback in terms of employment and traditional jobs, you've given people the freedom to think a little bit and be creative and explore new opportunities, which I think is obviously a good thing. I think the big shift will be having more and more people being able to take that entrepreneurial leap. I think education will be big, like you mentioned earlier, just in terms of, is this CD good for me, or what's the best thing for my investment portfolio? I'm eager to see kind of how many more people are able to kind of accept, call it responsibility for their own future versus being dependent on traditional institutions, whether it be an employer or government benefits or these kind of things. That I think is I don't know how much is directly tied to the pandemic, but a shift that interests me and that I'm seeing.
Yeah. And, this is interesting coming back full circle to you personally. You mentioned specifically, like, you were willing to take the risk after that, 1 month hiatus and then 10 months back in corporate law, changing companies. You were able to see the forest for the trees, or the trees for the forest, however that saying goes. You were able to see it and be like, hey, corporate America will always take me back. There's always some W-2 job I can come back to, but either for your sense of adventure or sense of independence or the fact that making our own way in this country is actually many times more safe than putting in 20 years of labor for somebody else's company. What was it about you that allowed you to see that future and go take the chance? Because I think so many Americans, to your point, if they're not on some type of public assistance or government support, and they're stuck in that corporate job for a year or 5 years or 20 years, like they don't see that opportunity. They don't see what you saw. So, what allowed you to take that jump? Forget about moving to Colombia. Just for most people, stopping employment at their W-2 job is scary enough for most people.
Right. Not something that happens overnight. I think that there's probably fundamentally a internal anxiousness or need for diversity, or maybe a little bit of a stop in growth in a professional career. I mean, lots of people, and they can be very happy working for somebody else and doing those kind of things. Not for everybody. But for me, I think I just needed something different. I saw the process of building a business, raising money for a business, structuring it correctly, working with investors, all that kind of went into that. And then I would say I'm fortunate in the sense that I always had that landing pad if I needed it. But I also worked really, really hard to build that and prepare myself to be in a position where doing something a little different would not be as scary for somebody or wasn't as scary as it might be for somebody who has, tons of debt or tons of kind of material items that they're looking to protect. Or frankly, some people just aren't in a position to do things in a rapid sense or so drastically because of family obligations or kids. And I understand the responsibility of that. I didn't have that going on at the time. I saw the opportunity, and something in my gut told me to go for it. And there's, in a way, not a whole lot deeper than that to some extent.
Yeah. So no debt, no kids. That ship has sailed for me. But for anybody out there watching the podcast that currently has no debt, no kids, that's when you want to spread your wings and try to fly into something like this. And I'm guessing, you mentioned the minimum wage there is about $250 a week. Did you say?
A month.
A month. All right. $250 a month, which means cost of living down there has got to be pretty dirt cheap, right? So what does it cost somebody to move to Colombia and live there if they're like, man, I want to follow Adam's dream and I want to do what he's doing. I'm a big cigar smoker. Spoiler alert, and sorry to burst your bubble. I hate coffee, so I might be an investor, but I'll never be a client. But you haven't had good coffee.
Yeah,
exactly. You want to get into the tobacco side of the house. I know all the right people in the cigar industry who could give you the same insider tips, and I would be down there, bi-monthly to help test the product. But so if you're in that spot, no debt, no kids, and you got a little bit of entrepreneurial niche, move to Colombia. What does it cost to live down there?
Between my wife and I, we just looked at this a little while ago. We have 3-bed, 3-bath apartment, nice luxury building. We have a farmhouse. She's got the car. I don't want a car here. I gave that up a while ago. But all in costs for kind of our lifestyle, we spend about $4,000 a month.
Wow.
And that's, frankly, hard to do. I mean, you could get by here, cut that in half, especially if you're just a single guy coming down and looking to start something new. Very, very cheap. The dollar continues to get stronger against the peso. It's almost unfair. Like you go to a nice restaurant here that would cost you $1,000 in New York, and it might cost you $60 here.
Yeah.
Without sacrificing, I would say, a material level of quality.
Yeah.
Although I was having trouble finding a good pizza place for a while, but I just found one. So
perfect.
It's cheap.
If I ever make a real move, I have a house in LA and then second home up here in Vegas. If I ever leave, that will be two things I will miss: the jiu-jitsu gyms I work out at, and I will miss the food, because you can get world-class dining on just about any corner in LA and any corner in Vegas. So that would be a little tough for me to leave. Obviously, anybody who's ever watched one of these episodes knows I have plenty of issues and complaints and problems with LA. But it's like, I hear stories like this, And I just think to myself, why is any single individual or young couple who lives in LA and can do 90% of their business on the internet, why are they still living there and not heading out to Colombia or Mexico City or Manila or something? Maybe not Manila. They've got worse lockdowns than Los Angeles, but somewhere where it's just so cheap to live. Like if you can make US dollars and spend Colombian pesos, I mean, that's like an arbitrage situation where you just quadruple your net worth or your cash flow overnight.
Yeah. I mean, you also tax wise, I mean, the first 120K that we make is entirely tax free just by living outside the country. So
That from
for most people,
from US taxes, if you live outside of the country X amount of months a year, your first 120,000 is completely tax free.
that's right. There's a foreign income tax exclusion. Unfortunately, the gift of being a US citizen is we're taxed on a worldwide basis. If you live outside the country for enough time, you get 108,000 in terms of foreign income exclusion, and then you get the standard 12K deduction or right around there. So you get 120 total where you're basically living tax free. If you're making that kind of money, 120,000 here in Colombia, just based on if you're spending $2,000 a month, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that the LA, living in the US, I've seen it more and thought about it, reflected it more being outside. I think unless it's a viable option to consider, I think unless there's some pre-existing family responsibility that keeps you there, my mother's really old and I take care of her, so it's not responsible for me, or I just can't be in this industry without having the connections that exist in this market, and this is where the people are. Yeah. To me, those would be the only logical explanations. But when you're talking about daily things like healthcare, I think down here in Colombia, we have the 21st best healthcare system globally. Huge industry of global healthcare tourism, where people will come here for things like stem cells or cancer treatments or surgeries and spend 5 days here and do the surgery here. And it's, I don't even know the exact fraction versus what it would cost in the US, but significant.
Yeah.
Education. I'm not a big fan of US public schools or traditional education in general. If that's what's holding you, that's available in many places. And I think in a way, probably good in terms of a broadening of horizons, whether it means learning new cultures, learning new languages, lots of benefits that people don't consider because the idea, at least at this point in time, still seems so foreign to so many people.
Yeah, my like I said, my wife's Mexican. One of our goals is somewhere between now and the next 6 to 7 years before the kids would make it to junior high school, we want them to be educated in a Latin school where they speak Spanish. And we've always just thought it was going to be Mexico, but you're starting to lean me over to Colombia. So I have to ask.
I'm doing well.
You're doing well. You're doing good. You got the good sales pitch going on. I have to ask because I know my wife will ask. Right, like again, 100% of our knowledge of the country of Colombia comes from the show Narcos. So I have to ask. Is drug trafficking still a thing there? Is that still on the radar of the government? Does it pose any threat to the average citizen, or is it kind of like America where you're only going to find trouble if you go looking for trouble for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, drug trafficking obviously exists everywhere. Sometimes it's more dangerous in the consumer markets than it is in the production markets. So, inner cities in New York are plagued by, or in the US, are plagued with all these problems, whether it's opioid addictions or crack problems or whatever it is. Colombia has, since I think it was the last, call it 15 to 17 years, eliminated basically any presence of like the large drug cartels like you would hear about when you're watching Narcos or anything. You're always going to have drug production here because it's like some of the most fertile land on earth, and people are going to continue. If there's a market, people are going to continue to do it.
Of course.
But in terms of the local population, I've never seen or heard of any local Colombian like participating in using cocaine or drug stuff. A lot of the attention that comes to it is honestly from tourism and foreigners coming in and I guess call it looking for a cheap source of doing those kind of things. Danger level or anything. I mean, every day I walk to the gym, I go to the store, I go to the office, I walk around. It's we had 7 investors come here last month, and every one of them invested, and one of them wanted to move here and open a gym because he liked the girls so much and loved the city so much. So
Right.
it's not just kind of my my words here, but it's the reality of things. It's a great place to be. The weather is, they call Medellin the land of eternal spring. We basically are 75 to 80 year round, sun, great tourism, go to the beach in an hour, go to the mountains in an hour. I think that the difficulty of life seizes a little bit when you open yourself up to these new opportunities.
Yeah. And just so I can plan my own day for when I move down there, what's the time difference right now? So it's 11 a.m. in Southern California. What time is it there?
Right now I'm on East Coast time. We split the year US East Coast time and US Central time. Right now it's 2 p.m. East Coast time.
All right. I got it. Cool.
Which is good for doing business. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's a if you're in Asia or whatever, or Europe, it's a much different beast than, you and I are basically at the same time.
Yeah, my best friend does mergers and acquisitions for Citibank, and he lives in Singapore. He helps run the, I don't know what that is, Pan America something trade, whatever. And he crushes it. But when he comes home to visit family, he's like, oh yeah, man, I got a meeting. I got to be up at 2 a.m, 4 a.m. Then I'm going to get a few hours of sleep. And then I'm like, Jesus, dude, that does not sound fun at all. So
yeah,
count me out for that corporate job. So what's next for you and the company? Like, again, I'd love to see you go into tobacco and do the same thing, because I like cigars way more than I like coffee. But do you see this as, our company is going to specialize in these 1 or 2 verticals, or is it really just about, I want to find opportunity in Colombia and Latin America, and wherever the chips fall, it doesn't really matter the industry?
Yep. I like to stay focused. Coffee, the green coffee company, the business that we're building here, that's going to serve as a platform for us to do many things. Quick next steps on where we're going. We'll be the biggest producer of coffee in all of Colombia next year. We're also adding on a US component where we're selling roasted coffee into the US. The idea being become more vertically integrated, sell our own coffee further down the value chain, take the margins from $1 a pound to $6 to $7 a pound. We will get to an exit, I think, in the coming years, whether that's through a sale to private equity, to one of our large international clients, be it a Starbucks, for example, somebody who wants to add on really the only consolidated Colombian coffee company that they can tack onto their own portfolio. Or we'll take the business public in the US and I think get great returns for our investors because of the story, the business behind it, the sustainability and traceability elements that we're adding to the business, which are more important than ever when it comes to ESG investing and making an impact globally. And we'll continue to use the coffee business for a platform. We're looking at, for example, when you pick a cherry of coffee off a tree, it comes in the cherry form. You have the pulp, you have the bean inside. The beans where the coffee comes from. All of the cherry is essentially just a byproduct that is, to us, garbage or used for fertilizer. People here, unfortunately, oftentimes dump it into the water sources. It ferments. The fermentation is the good news, because for us, we're exploring with local universities here, how can we, for example, take that coffee cherry and turn it into a new product? The most likely to be some kind of form of distilled alcohol. We've been talking to a university in Germany. They've already run studies on it where basically the coffee byproduct would become, in its distilled form, a competitor to vodka. has about 25% of the caffeine that a normal cup of coffee was, but can distill down to that vodka grade where you could use it as a potential mixer. You could drink it alone. You could use it in seltzer products. But for us, what's important is taking a waste product and turning it into a revenue source.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot in the energy production space, whether it be working with some, I would say, major donors in the US to help with the infrastructure that we're doing and get those solar ready to help be a responsible participant of the climate change things that we're seeing going on. It's going to spur into so many things, but fundamentally, it'll be the biggest coffee company in Colombia, third largest in the world, with a US component that we can sell or take public and do well for our investors.
That's awesome, man.
Where we go beyond that, I think will be basically a direct result of how well we can deliver for our investors. We have lots of ideas, lots of opportunities, but I believe we have to earn it. And if we do, I think we can open up the Colombian market substantially to additional investors, more capital, find more business opportunities here, get more seats at the table when we're talking about these unicorn companies that we're seeing. We could really be, I guess, the face for US investors who are interested in the market and who we've delivered for in the past.
That's awesome. I've got one question and a comment there. One, my father-in-law owns a large ranch up in Gilroy where they make all the garlic. I should bring him down there because he's like a rancher at heart. He would love this kind of stuff. And what's interesting that you spurred the thought for me about him is that this is exactly what he does. He takes for 6 months out of the year, he takes all the tonnage, and it's millions of tons of waste from the garlic and the onions, and then he takes it to his ranch. They reprocess it, and they basically make it into cow feed for the dairy cows. And so his whole business model, and he's created a very great business and a very great life for his family, all depends on like taking what used to just be waste and composted into like, wait, no, there's, about 20 years ago, they figured out there's a protein level in that waste that can then be mixed with this, that can then turn into this, that can then go to cow feed. And it's like, he's just the middleman of waste, which is fascinating to me because he's got hundreds of people coming in and out of the ranch all day long. And it's not a beautiful rolling hills bonanza ranch. It is a working ranch where they break shit down. So not maybe what you're picturing, but man, I should come down there with him because he would love it. It would be a blast for him.
You guys should. I mean, the agriculture is great for this kind of thing. I personally think that the alcohol side of the business could be the distillation and byproduct side of the business could be bigger than the coffee company. I mean, not bigger than the coffee company because it'll all be rolled in, but a bigger revenue generator for the business than the coffee itself. With each bean of coffee, you get about 4 times the pulp. So you're talking about basically 4 times the amount of product that you can be using to generate revenue and selling it at a higher price point. So we're always looking at these other avenues we can explore that are natural tack-ons to what we're already doing, where people who are already invested want to invest more, and they're excited about the new opportunities that we're building.
That's amazing. And then you mentioned something that I hear a lot, seems like a buzzword. I know Professor Scott Galloway is always talking about in his podcast, who I love listening to him and his thoughts on business and integration of technology and stuff. You mentioned vertical integration, and you kind of glossed over it, where $1 a pound to $7 a pound, and I think you said controlling distribution. I was trying to take some notes vigorously. Can you explain to people what that means? Because if you listen to somebody like a Professor Scott Galloway or somebody like a Warren Buffett or whatever, they're always like, oh, you got to control distribution and vertical integration to make, and I'm like, well, yeah, that sounds great. Can somebody explain to me what the fuck that is? So can you tell me from the coffee bean what vertical integration means to you guys and why that's important to profitability in the future of your business model?
Yeah, basically the theory is the more you can divide things up, the more profit potential it has. I think coffee, take Starbucks, for example, those guys in a pound of coffee can make about, I think it's 66 cups of coffee. And if they're selling it, call it $4 a cup, you can do the math of, $250 per bag of coffee that they're buying, right?
And
So the
and what are
farther you go down,
what are you guys selling that bag of coffee? Or I'm guessing you guys process the beans, you sell it to a wholesaler, the wholesaler turns around and sells it to Starbucks. So if we assume Starbucks gets 66 cups of coffee out of a pound of coffee, they make 250. What does the chain look like below them?
yeah, that's setting the stage there with how much they're making is kind of backing up through what's the value of being further down the value chain. Right now, our business is grow the coffee, process the coffee, sell the coffee to B2B, export, large import clients, large domestic buyers. Right now, we're seeing a basically unprecedented spike in coffee prices, largely due to shortages out of Brazil. But our cost of production for a pound of coffee will be about $1. We're selling now for about $2.60 per pound. The natural next step for our business is add on a roasting component to the business in the US. What does that mean? It means right now we move the coffee in the solid bean form, pre-roasted. So if you were to look at like a raw coffee bean, it's green. The reason it gets that brown color is because people basically roast it, or put it even simpler, they cook it so that it gets that tint and that flavor that you have. The natural kind of coffee off taste is not possible without first roasting the coffee. Then they mill it down, they put it in the 1 pound bags that you see, and that's what people are buying in the store for, high specialty in coffee, $30 a pound. The stuff that people maybe drink like a Maxwell House or whatever, call it $4 to $5 a pound. But our thought process is we're going to have 10 million pounds of coffee in the next couple of years here. Right now, we're already doing about 4 million pounds of coffee a year. If we can move it farther down the value chain / vertically integrate the business more, where we're closer to the direct consumer, you get more of the profit margin. So versus selling in bulk to Starbucks, who then flips our coffee and sells it for a substantial amount more, we go closer to the consumer. And when I talk about consumers, I more think about wholesale clients like a grocery chain, hotels, somebody like that's creating their own brand who needs coffee for wrapping around the brand that they create. Maybe they want to sell 1 million pounds of coffee a year, those kind of things. That's where you go from $1.50 of margin, or I guess, it's great in the sense it's 250% on what we're talking about, but this is where you get to the margins of what we're seeing now, about $6 to $9 per pound of coffee by moving further down the value chain.
Yeah.
/ vertically integrating.
And so the vertical integration is if you guys can do the production in the green bean form, but then also own the roaster that gets it to the brown bean farm or brown bean form, and then you also own the grinder. Maybe you even do the wholesale and distribution, and eventually you're just selling to the end product. Now you're $1 to $2.60, and obviously you have extra costs in there, but you're $1 to $2.60, which is a great profit. Now it goes from $1, maybe $2 a hard cost to $9 or $12 or something like that. So you 4x your profit just by owning the whole chain of command.
That's right. And you don't even have to own the whole chain, but your math is right. I mean, it basically goes from $1 of production and $1.50 of profit to $2 of production and call it $4 to $7 of profit by going one step further down the chain, which is really not that much. I mean, coffee roasting is not, if you have the right people and the technology, it's all about distribution contracts. So if you have a good relationship with supermarket chain or a hotel brand or a coffee brand that you've either created yourself or that somebody else has created that you're a supplier for, there's a lot more profit margin to be gained. So we'll continue to go closer down that B2C channel and also do stuff organically ourselves. We'll be launching in the next 10 days, definitely in time for Christmas 2021, to have all of our coffee on Amazon. And, there's your perfect example. It costs us about $6 all in to send and deliver a bag of coffee from Colombia to your doorstep. And we'll sell the coffee for like $12 to $15.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. And then what is the market? How's your Spanish and how is the English down there for most Colombians? You know, thinking about future business opportunities and kind of replication of American businesses that can obviously scale in Latin American countries, but I'm thinking of stuff as like, wow, you know, I currently have a virtual assistant in the Philippines and it's rough for her because we're on, you know, an 11-hour time difference. Having a virtual assistant from Colombia, if the English is as high quality as it is in the Philippines, would be amazing. Like now you've got my wheels spinning about entrepreneurial ventures into Colombia. So what is the English dynamic like down there?
I would say my Spanish is fluent or near fluent. You know, maybe my wife, when she's talking shit, will tell you otherwise, but I think it's pretty good. I would say in terms of the business environment, most of the people that you would be interacting with, whether it be clients, people that you're hiring for the business, are all going to know English. Most of the kind of higher level folks in the country will have studied abroad, grew up in the major cities where learning English is greatly emphasized for being able to really do multinational business, work in companies where English is a prerequisite. It's good to know the language because one, it shows a lot of respect for the people that you're working with, where you could basically do it in their native language if you wanted to. And it's not I'm the white guy from the US who came down here and you're going to do things my way.
Right.
But also there's cultural dynamics, cultural things around the language that are helpful to understand. But, you know, for example, 3 weeks ago, my wife and I went to dinner she's a doctor here. One of her patients is, I would say, one of the top fashion entrepreneurs down here in the country. We went to dinner at his house and the entire conversation was in Spanish, even though he speaks English. And I think it's a respect thing that you build and build those relationships. And you have to show you're really committed. It's very easy to tell if somebody is, call it taking advantage for lack of a better term, but
right.
you got to be bought in and people can see through that.
Yeah, I love that. It's very embarrassing because my 5-year-old has now, he's fully bilingual. He only speaks to grandma in Spanish. And it's gotten to the point where now my 5-year-old punks me hard. And he's like, Daddy, why do you say muy bien like a white person? It's muy bien.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, Gabriel. Yeah. My Spanish sucks. And that's why I'm making sure that you and your mom can always speak it to translate for me. So, I would have a little bit of an uphill battle. I'm very, very, very self-conscious of my pronunciation unless I've had a few drinks. But by the time we're about a bucket of beer in, all of a sudden my Spanish is on point, or at least I think it is. So
another reason to come down here and practice and have a bucket of beer and
exactly
see if you can do it.
So I always like to, close on these two questions, and I'll give them to you and you can go whichever direction you like. One is, what's the question I forgot to ask? What's the financial question, the interesting story about Adam, whatever that you want to share that you're like, man, I wish somebody would ask these questions when I do these type of interviews or when I'm doing an investment raise. So that's one question. And then the second question is, like you said, we're recording this, right before Christmas in 2021, going into 2022. What are you most looking forward to, either personally or professionally? So you can go either direction. You there. What's the question I forgot to ask, or what are you most looking forward to in 2022?
Most looking forward to, I would say, like I mentioned, just got married, doing a good job on that front. And I think that leads to kind of all the things that really drive me every day on the business, in terms of things you don't know about me or could have asked. I was a football player back in college. If you're watching this on video, you wouldn't know it because I now weigh like 160 pounds, but I weighed 250 back in the day and played defensive line. My driver has always been competition, externally, internally. I'm incredibly excited about the opportunities that lie in front of us on the business side of things. We've made a lot of promises to people this year in terms of bringing in capital and doing a good job for our investors. A lot of my family's invested, friends, etc. I want to do a good job for them and really deliver and continue to kind of push myself and grow. And I wake up excited every day and eager for the opportunities that are in front of us. And I think that's a feeling that I hope I can maintain throughout 2022.
by the way, you basically answered the question for me. What's the thing we forgot to ask? Had you asked me, D lineman would have been the last thing I would have guessed. If you would have said I played college athletics, I'd have been like, oh, cross country. I don't know, maybe the punter, maybe a point guard.
Don't say that.
If you would have, yeah, I would have. You could have given me 100 guesses of NCAA athletic endeavors that you took on in college, and D lineman would have been last. So
I need a new. They got to do like Zoom backgrounds where you can put new bodies on you. So exactly. It looks like bigger shoulders.
Used to be like 250, 260.
My heaviest was 240.
Jesus, man, you're a big guy.
Yeah, and I was. I undersold. Now I'm maybe like 180.
Yeah, still 70 pounds, 60 pounds. That's a lot of weight. And
I
last,
did though.
Go for it.
I did play American football here in Colombia when I first came down. So one of my missions was to join, they have, I don't know, call it not pickup, but more organized leagues here. There's no high school football, there's no college football, but there's enough of an American influence where they've created leagues around the country. So at 34, I said, I want to try this one more time. Played for the team for 2 years at defensive end, but only at like 190 pounds. But the Colombian people are smaller, so it was a little bit more, and less trained, so it was a little more reasonable. But I don't know. I like the adventurous aspect of things and just doing things a little different, I guess.
That's awesome. And last question, because my buddy Adam Stock, who's actually a financial planner out of Chicago, we're in a group together called Front Row Dads. Awesome guy. You two should really meet each other. So maybe that's an introduction I can make for you. I'll introduce the two Adams.
Okay.
He says that one of his favorite questions to learn about people is, what's your favorite movie? So let's close there. What is Adam Jason's all-time favorite movie?
The one that most comes to mind, I just got the privilege of serving as godfather for my new niece. So the amount of times I quoted that movie in the last month and a half makes me think that that's probably my favorite movie or series of movie, just because of the genius and dialogue behind it. And also I like to quote English movies to Spanish speaking people because I can say whatever I want.
Yeah, and they have no clue. The Godfather is one of the all-time greats. And interesting trivia for you, since you're a big Godfather fan. The Godfather series is the only movie series where two different actors won an Oscar for playing the same role. So Marlon Brando and then Robert De Niro, as a younger version of themselves, they both won Oscars for playing the same character. So
that's a good one.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, do me a favor. I want to stay in touch. So send me whatever your pitch deck is, whatever the follow-up information is as a potential investor. You know, I wanted to talk to you anyway and just kind of get a good podcast out, but also kind of want to interview you for myself, along with a couple other GoBundance folks that are thinking about investing. And I'll make sure I release this in that group and try to help you get your raise to where you want it to be. Cause I really believe in what you're doing, man. Just in the short time we spent together, it sounds awesome. And you just sound like a super up and up person that I would want to invest money with. And I think other people probably got that same vibe off of this introduction and this podcast. So thanks for being on, Adam. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Happy to share anything. Happy to have any conversations with any of your listeners or people you know, and just connect. This was a fun time, and I'm glad to have got the chance to meet you.
Cool, man. We'll talk soon, Adam.
All right. Thanks, Scott.